what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with the midweek update in the world of cannabis. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learn something, please just leave a like on it, as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. And there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the industry, identify top players that you keep seeing pop up, and then take advantage whenever you feel ready if you wish to do so. We're going to start with some news that I relayed on Sunday through a snippet. We're just going to dive into a little bit more detail. As Marijuana Moment reports, New Jersey rec cannabis sales hit 80 million since post 420 launch until June 30th. So from July 1st until then, numbers have not been added into this, but I imagine the market is slowly but surely growing. And so this was published on Monday, as New Jersey raked in 4.6 million in tax revenue in the first 10 weeks since rec cannabis sales launched. And they would have raked in a whole lot more tax revenue if they launched a lot sooner, much like Arizona. But nonetheless, the tax revenue came from nearly 80 million customers spent on legal rec cannabis between April 21st and June 30th. The State Cannabis Regulatory Commission announced in a statement Friday. It includes more than 219,000 in social equity excise fees. And so the market is improving. It is performing as we expect with the current number of dispensaries, the spread of locations, and the high prices, said Jeff Brown, executive director of the CRC. Very beneficial for the MSOs operating and able to sell right now. As more cannabis businesses come online, consumers won't have to travel as far to make purchases, and prices will fall with increased competition. The market will do even better. And so recreational cannabis sales totaled nearly 1.9 million on April 21st, the day the industry launched, with 12 dispensaries only in the state of New Jersey, which has a population of about 10 million people, or no, I think 8 million, 9 million. In the first month, the state brought in 24 million in weed sales, much lower compared to other states with nascent adult use cannabis industries, while adult users can now buy from 18 dispensaries. So from April 21st to now, they have approved 6 more. So again, they're slowly approving, but obviously there's more on the way. Those 18 dispensaries scattered around the state that also serve medical patients. The CRC has issued 140 conditional legal cannabis dispensary licenses, but none have opened. Probably asking yourself why. Yes, obviously the sooner they can open at, the better, especially for these small business owners and minority entrepreneurs that likely are waiting to open this after the MSOs have already gotten the head start. And so basically just wanted to dive through this a little more deeply. You can pause, read for more information, or you can grab the link below, but that is it out of New Jersey. Just wanted to share as Yahoo Finance, we're starting to see some of these headlines again. This time it's coming from Tilray CEO Erwin Simon saying that cannabis, the U.S. is a 100 billion opportunity. And so obviously when these headlines start popping back up, that usually is helpful, and when it's in line with another election season, as we've seen in the past in 2020 into 2021. Since cannabis was a big winner in the 2020 election and we saw that run into February, could we see the same thing again this fall? We'll have to wait and see, but that is why we are paying attention and planning accordingly. So just to share a little snippet from this, the U.S. is a $100 billion opportunity in cannabis, and if you look at cannabis today in the U.S., 93% of Americans want medical cannabis legalized, and about 65% want adult use, which is pretty significant, especially in today's climate when it's one of the few issues that most Americans actually agree at this point in time is the right thing to do, especially when today it's legal in about 33 states plus DC, yet at the same time still a Schedule 1 substance in the CSA, claiming it has no medical value, which is again completely ridiculous. But the more we can get the masses aware of these contradictions in the law and help them rally for the cause, the better chances we have at actually getting some momentum and forcing politicians to keep their hand and keep some campaign promises. But so it's out there that a majority of people want cannabis legally, and so this article seems to focus on Tilray and Curaleaf, two large operators. Obviously Curaleaf a US MSO, Tilray a Canadian LP, but both have a footprint in Germany and trying to capitalize on that market as Germany plans to legalize in 2023 and hopefully launch in 2024. So just going to go through this, just going to highlight that, but there's more to the article if you want to grab the link below or if you wanted to watch the video. But back to the US, as MJ Biz Daily reports, several state cannabis legalization initiatives could make the fall ballot. So on the note saying that this could be another election win for cannabis, we have cannabis legalization initiatives in Arkansas, Maryland, Missouri, North Dakota, Oklahoma, and Nebraska this November. So obviously positive to see that cannabis can win another landslide victory, as voters in several states could decide whether to legalize cannabis during the November midterm elections. And so most of them are for either a split of recreational and medical, while Nebraska is for medical only. And so voters will decide whether to legalize commercial adult use sales of adult use cannabis in as many as 5 states during the November midterm elections, while medical cannabis could get on the ballot in Nebraska. And a recreational cannabis legalization referendum will be on the ballot in Maryland after state lawmakers voted in April to put the question before the voters this fall. And so Missouri was another big one that's followed on. We have a few other efforts too that we'll get to in here, but again, just good to see that as we head into November, cannabis is going to be on ballots and it's likely going to win a lot of these votes. While Rhode Island, apparently 30 plus towns to decide on cannabis sales measures this November. So thanks, Todd, for sharing this. So while Rhode Island was not featured in there, Obviously, whatever changes we can get and whatever reform efforts we can will obviously slowly but surely help change the tide, as state officials are anticipating to begin licensing commercial cannabis operations in December. And I do believe that Rhode Island was supposed to launch, and I do apologize, I didn't end up reading this article, but if you wanted to look into it, it will give you more details about what Rhode Island is possibly, like what they're voting on versus what sort of legislative efforts they've already made. So I do apologize, just being honest, I didn't end up going through this whole one, but just wanted to add it that, hey, more efforts for cannabis reform is better than seeing less efforts and the status quo remaining the same. And so with that, thanks Todd for sharing this one. As New York cannabis regulators approve first processor licenses and cannabis testing rules ahead of retail sales launch. So good to see New York taking steps in the right direction, especially after taking their sweet ass time, having legalized in March of 2021, and now it's August 2022, and they're still finally taking these tiny steps. But again, I'll just get to the highlights from this article. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. You can grab the link below, but a few things noteworthy. The board on Monday accepted 15 licenses for existing hemp businesses seeking to process cannabis and extract cannabinoids, and this marks the first approvals for that adult use license type in New York. So this is for processor licensing only. I would imagine turning hemp into extracts. And then these are the latest steps, or next steps were taken that regulators are preparing to open the first recreational shops. People who were directly impacted by the drug war will get the initial retail licensing priority, and CCB said last week that applications for those conditional licenses will be accepted starting on August 25th. So that's a week away. Good to see that they will hand out those licenses to the social equity entrepreneurs who are supposed to get first dibs at selling rec in New York. And then lastly, on Monday, regulators also approved 19 more cultivator licenses for a total of 242 licensed cultivators that can grow legal cannabis for medicinal and recreational outlets. And so while that is interesting and good to see that they're going to start handing out licenses on August 25th to the social equity entrepreneurs, again, worth highlighting that this is also interesting because it sort of highlights that while New York is very blue, they also don't agree as much with how blue and how progressive New York wants to be with their social equity programs, as a recent poll found New York voters are against the proposal to prioritize retail licenses for justice-involved people. And I do agree, you shouldn't give licenses to just justice-involved people if they have no business experience and they're not going to be able to run a profitable business. They have to show themselves competent as well. And while all these factors do make for a very interesting experiment in New York, and we're going to be watching with our eyes peeled over the next few years, we don't necessarily know how this is going to play out and whether or not it's going to affect the MSOs positively or negatively, and how soon they might iron out some of these kinks by allowing the regulators to sort of have a chokehold on the industry versus allowing the companies to sort of build it from the ground up, provide jobs, tax revenue, and obviously the sooner they could launch this, the better for everyone in New York. But regardless, I digress. Just a bit more information on those who disagree with giving the social equity licenses. So thank you, Mr. Diesel, for sharing these snippets from the survey findings. And so while I'm not going to read through them, you can pause to read. But nonetheless, interesting findings, what you might not expect out of New York, but I definitely think I'm more happy with these results, as it does highlight that more people agree with, bottom-up capitalist approaches to businesses and industries as opposed to top-down socialist approaches that have never worked time and time again. And so you can pause to read from here, and then you can also just go from giving dibs on cannabis down to New Yorkers sound split. So that will be interesting, but nonetheless wanted to share this one because when you delay launching an adult use program, that is what allows the black market to thrive, and that is what creates problems like this. So just want to share this one from Todd Harrison, sharing a Syracuse.com article. Upstate Poison Center alarmed by surge in cases of kids eating candy like cannabis. You do not get this cannabis from a licensed, legal, medical or adult use recreational dispensary. It wouldn't happen. This is what you get when you delay launching a program. You keep the status quo alive and you let the black market thrive. And so Todd, good point here. One of the several reasons regulated operators will crowd out the illicit market, once they're up and running, and why they should be up and running sooner than later. And it's all in your best interest, New York regulators. Come on. So just to highlight from that, Colorado, a state that doesn't make the same mistakes that New York made, Colorado cannabis shops are 98% compliant with ID checks to prevent underage sales. State regulator says. Colorado officials says that they will continue efforts to monitor licensee compliance and evaluate business practices. And so big ups to Colorado for shutting prohibitionists up and doing it first so that they can gather the data to prove that when you launch a legal adult use program, as opposed to letting the black market thrive, it makes it harder for kids to get access to cannabis. And the onus should still be on the parent. Do a better job of hiding your stash. And if somehow your kid finds the stash and you got to bring them to the hospital, don't tell the world about it and blame it on the industry. Look in the mirror and do a better fucking job as a parent. And on that note, just to highlight again what I've been saying, this Forbes article, thank you Jungle Java for sharing, adult use cannabis legalization reduces use of synthetic cannabinoids. New study finds. You allow the black market to thrive and you don't reform your cannabis laws, synthetic cannabinoids can thrive, and obviously these can be contaminated drugs, unsafe, untested, and not what you want rummaging its way through society. So there's really no debate anymore, and if we're really doing anything in the name of public health, obviously legalization is far more socially constructive than criminalization. The data doesn't lie at this point. And with that, Cannabis Moment reports that Americans say cannabis is better for people and society than alcohol, Gallop poll shows. And so Again, just happy to collect more and more data in this one place, as overall the cannabis poll found that Americans are evenly divided when it comes to questions about the effects of cannabis on individual consumers and society overall. 53% of respondents said cannabis has a positive impact on the consumer, in contrast to 45% negative, and 49% said that the plant is good for society, compared to 50% with the opposite view. And so asking the questions, what effect do you think the use of cannabis has on most people who use it in society, goes from very positive, somewhat negative, very negative. Total positive, though, highlighted 53% believe that the effects on most cannabis users was 53% positive versus 45% negative, and the effects on society 49% positive versus 50% negative. And so, while it is unfortunate to see that the majority still believes that cannabis might have a total negative effect on society than positive, take this with a grain of salt, because I'll make a few points. It's 49 to 50. Think about 10 years ago or 20 years ago, how much higher the number on the total negative side would have been compared to the total positive now. And so obviously that's changing as cannabis is legalized. People have exposure, they can get their own experience, and they can obviously see, okay, this is actually a lot more positive. And the data is already out there. It doesn't lie, but at the same time, it's also just, you're asking random Americans and then they're sharing their opinion. So a lot of, 50% could still just have outdated prohibitionist views, and they've just never looked at any new data. They have no idea all of this is going on, and they still just believe that alcohol is better than cannabis, or they still believe cannabis is the gateway drug. So again, take it with a grain of salt, but just happy to share through that, it's certainly just an improvement from where we would have been 10 years or 20 years ago. And so unlike alcohol, of course, cannabis remains federally illegal, surprisingly, and that makes it all the more notable that just 27% of people said that alcohol is good for the individual drinker, and 23% said alcohol is a societal positive. While fully 75% of Americans said booze is bad for society, and 71% say it is no good, or it's no good for most individuals who consume it, especially those who cannot control themselves and cannot consume in moderation. As alcohol as well is, I believe, the cause of 40% of crime in society, and so the fact that alcohol is legal and cannabis is illegal is just laughable at this point. But that's sort of what we're trying to, spread that idea out to the masses. So you can pause through for a bit more information on what effect do you think the use of alcohol has on society. Most people who drink it, very positive, very low results coming back positive or somewhat positive, mostly in the very negative. So at least people are being honest here, and we love to see that. Well, last bit I'm going to go through, but the Gallop poll released in 2 waves on Tuesday and earlier this month also reveals another interesting contrast in how the two substances are perceived. People who said that they've at least tried cannabis were far more likely to say that it's positive for the consumer and society compared to drinkers who felt the same way about alcohol. So while that is to be expected, when you look down here and see those who have never tried cannabis, 27% who have tried it think that it has a somewhat positive or very positive effect on society, while 72% who've never tried it believe that it'll have a negative impact, probably just because of the fact that they've never tried it. And so they're going off of, again, their imagination and what fear is being triggered in their brain, as opposed to the reality of consuming the plant once, having the experience, and being like, oh, wow, that's really not that bad. And so more information down here if you want to go through the whole link, but just wanted to point out a few things that I thought was interesting in the story. And so with that, good to see just more efforts out of states as Minnesota cannabis activists launch voter education effort to elect pro-legalization Senate. We know that who is in the legislature matters when it comes to passing major policies like this. So again, just love to see this push for more education around this initiative in Minnesota. So good job, activists there. While a new poll finds that majority of Texas voters support legalizing cannabis for both medical and recreational use. So we love to see this. Not going to go through the whole article, I will put it below, but just going to share this snippet. Do you support or oppose the legalization of cannabis in Texas for recreational use? It seems like these numbers are moving quickly to a more positive outlook than a negative, as strongly support, total 34%, 21% support, 9% neither oppose nor support, while 14% oppose and 21% strongly oppose. But very interesting findings nonetheless, as it does show even in a very red state like Texas, it's now the majority that does support even adult use legalization above 50% at about 55%, while it's now the minority group that actually opposes it, about 35%, and then we've got 9 or 10 left over that are undecided. So with that, MSO news as Verano announces second quarter 2022 financial results. And so not going to dive through these too deep. I do have Sayshu's breakdown here if you want to wait for that, and you'll be able to pause to read, but just going to go through some of the highlights for Verano, as despite what they've gone through in the last few weeks and months, especially as their previous financial statements are typically void. So obviously that would lead any investor to believe, well, why should I take any of these seriously? Doesn't discount from the fact that Verano is still a real business operating on the ground, expanding into real, brick and mortar stores and, making real cash from selling cannabis, or at least they're getting to cash flow positive. But regardless, all I mean by that is that they are a real business making real US dollars. And so despite all the noise and the fact that people make mistakes and it hasn't looked good on them, I'm still not counting the fact out that they are surviving in this very tough environment. And so as we go through the second quarter financial highlights, Q2 2022 revenue increased 12% to $224 million compared to the second quarter 2021. So keep in mind that is year-over-year growth, not sequential growth, but I imagine some of the growth that they saw in New Jersey offset some of the more tough markets that the other MSOs are having to battle through and deal with as well. So obviously having that New Jersey is a big leg up. Q2 2022 gross profit was $98 million or 44% of revenue compared to $69 million or 35% of revenue in the second quarter of 2021. So love to see in this quarter that they make 44% of that, their gross profit makes up 44% of revenue as opposed to 35%, but that obviously gets offset as Q2 2022 SG&A was $100 million or 45% of revenue, which is selling, general, and administrative costs, compared to $70 million or 35% of revenue in the second quarter. So whatever profits that they capitalized and made probably went to the SG&A. So not ideal, but again, difficult times that we're going through, and I imagine that they're trying to just set themselves up for a much better future when the sentiment towards cannabis does shift. But Q2 2022 net loss was negative $10 million compared to a loss of negative $30 million in the second quarter of 2021 last year. Q2 2022 EBITDA, or earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, on an unadjusted basis was $48 million or 22% of revenue, and adjusted EBITDA was $76 million or 34% of revenue, while they claim to have made cash flow from operations for the 6 months ended June 30th, 2022 was $44 million. So with that, more operational highlights here. You can pause to read if you're interested. And then I'm also going to go through subsequent operational highlights, so you can pause to read if you're interested. And that's really all I'm going to go through with Verano. And so Sayshu Metacharla, thank you, Sayshu, for sharing your second quarter 2022 earnings and takeaways, as he does a deeper dive, probably has a lot more training in looking at finance and reading statements than I do. So just wanted to share this if you wanted to take a deeper dive. So you can pause to read from one all the way down to down to big change. And then so I'm going to scroll down from number 4, CFO, down to 2023, so you can pause to read. And then from 8 down to pricing pressure is real and overcapacity can only make it worse, hence why it is wise not to overinvest like the Canadian LPs did. You can pause to read. And then 13 down to should show up in Q3 results. You can pause to read, as I imagine a lot more New Jersey growth is going to look very good on a lot of these Q3 earnings statements when they come in the next quarter. And then from 17 down to end, you can pause to read. And so if you want to grab the link below and just look into it more in more detail, you can grab that. While we move on to Columbia Care reports their second quarter 2022 results. And so some highlights: quarterly revenue of $129.6 million, an increase of 5% quarter over quarter and 18% year over year. And again, most of that, thank goodness, driven by New Jersey finally launching their adult use program. As fortunately, Columbia Care did see a little bit more quarter-over-quarter growth and year-over-year growth than some of the other MSOs, but they did not meet a lot of their estimates, so that's why they might not have gotten such a rave review or such a great response from their recent earnings, as I think they did miss a lot of their beats, or they missed a lot of their estimates. I don't think they beat any of them, but nonetheless, gross profit of $50.8 million, an increase of 17% year-over-year. So obviously that's ideal to see, as I imagine with the Cresco deal, they're just trying to cut back on costs and ensure that that new entity is in a good spot and able to carry things forward. As adjusted EBITDA of $12 million and year-to-date adjusted EBITDA margin of 11%, expected to be last quarterly results before announcing divestitures related to combination with Cresco. Which I do love to hear as a Cresco shareholder, because one of the interesting factors about this deal when Cresco announced that they're going to buy Columbia Care for $2 billion was how much money can they make back from selling licenses in high-demand states like New York and Ohio, where they have a lot of overlap in their footprint. And so we're going to have to wait and see how much they can make. Obviously, if it was, early January and February 2021, they could have almost probably sold New York for $500 million or close to $1 billion on its own. Now the prices are going to be much more deflated. Hopefully, if the industry can turn around, they can get a bit of a better price from now until whenever they announce this. But regardless, it just does get me excited, because I think a lot of what we're seeing in here, although they didn't meet their estimates, they're just trying to prepare the future entity of what Cresco and Columbia Care become for as much success as possible. And so while they did not beat, it just highlights that Columbia Care has what Cresco is lacking, that New Jersey presence, and once they can come together, hopefully they can cut as much costs and get as profitable as possible as soon as possible. And so second quarter 2022 US GAAP financial highlights. So we can see revenue from Q2 2022 did increase to $129.5 million, up from first quarter of 2022 $123 million. So it wasn't much of a big gain, but as you can see, one of the things here that's not as nice to see, gross profit in this quarter, even after New Jersey launching, was just $50.8 million compared to last quarter, which was $56.6. So, and I imagine a lot of the costs here or the fact that there's less gross profit had to go to, dealing with costs in California, Colorado, some of these more mature, difficult markets that are seeing a lot more price compression. And so again, just thank God for New Jersey to offset that. I'm far less interested in Columbia Care right now versus what Columbia Care and Cresco will become once this deal comes through. I'm not as concerned about the fact that they didn't beat their estimates, but it is still notable that top 5 markets by revenue in Q2, despite being more difficult markets, is still California because of the volume, I would imagine. Still Colorado, the most mature market in the country. Then we got Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and I'm really surprised to see Virginia up there, but I'm not mad at all. I kind of love it. Top 5 markets by adjusted EBITDA as well in Q2, Maryland, Massachusetts, Ohio, Pennsylvania. Good to see Virginia up there as well. It seems like it's a tight market, and they're at least, that Virginia is another one that is offsetting. New Jersey and Virginia offsetting some of the other markets that are struggling. And so, operational highlights for second quarter of 2022. Not going to go through them all, but you can pause to read building scale with continued retail growth, and then proven cultivation, expertise, and execution. And then from sustained momentum on branding initiatives at retail and product levels, down to update on Cresco transactions and milestone achieved. So you can pause to read there. While 2022 outlook, you can pause to read as well. But then moving on, did want to share Cannavestments as well, as I don't think Sayshu had put one out for Columbia Care yet, but got another deeper dive from Cannavestments on Columbia Care. And so just wanted to share this, so thank you Cannavestments for sharing this as well, so I can share it with my audience. But he highlights rough results from Columbia Care in Q2. Growth was well short of expectations, margins declined, and cash flow went from bad to worse, negative $72 million operational cash flow in Q2. Weakness in California and Colorado offset positive results in New Jersey, Virginia, and West Virginia, as a lack of market depth is growing apparent. And that highlights why that merger with Cresco Labs can't come soon enough, as I do think as long as Columbia Care can get over this, and I imagine Cresco, they will both they'll get through these current situations, but they will come out a lot stronger on the other side as that new entity. And so you can pause to read more about his breakdown and criticism, but just a last point, just to highlight on the positive side, preparations for the Cresco Labs merger sound on track, and the company hopes to utilize continued growth in New Jersey and Virginia to bridge the gap until Cresco Labs takes over. That's essentially what I'm seeing, so just wanted to relay that over to you as well. And so some more MSO news as Verano, though, continuing to introduce new flower and extract brands into new markets. So they bring Savvy in 7 core cannabis markets. It will launch in September of 2022 in Arizona, Florida, Illinois, Massachusetts, Maryland, Nevada, and Ohio, with additional launches planned in the future for New Jersey and Pennsylvania. And so across the company's national footprint, Savvy products will initially be distributed to approximately 85 Zenleaf and Move dispensaries across 7 states. And now I think they had pictures and press releases. Yeah, so this is what it's going to look like. I've seen better branding, but regardless, hopefully that can do well for Verano. While Trulieve opening another medical cannabis dispensary in Auburndale. So Trulieve not slowing down as well, and I think this might be their 120th. I'll try and confirm on Sunday as we look at the latest numbers, but new dispensary expands patient access to medical cannabis, grand opening specials available. And so while this sets them up well to continue to dominate in Florida, no doubt that new legalization initiative for 2024 that Trulieve is helping fund with $5 million of their own dollars as well. Again, MSOs trying to change the status quo for the better. I imagine Trulieve not only setting them up to lead the market in medical, but they are going to crush that adult use market once they finally change that. So 2024 cannot come soon enough. And so on that beacon on U.S. cannabis, so thanks Todd for sharing this. This is a cannabis industry update from August 15th, basically looking at what happened last week, as I did announce my past story, Florida adult use legalization proposal introduced while earnings season does continue. So it goes through a few of the earnings. You can grab the link below if some of this is cut off and you can't grab it, but this is, again, speculation from investment firms, but you get to look inside Beacon's head and see what they're seeing. And so with that, a few other stories. The Dales report does share a bear case, as MSO investors have heard the bull case for safe banking passage this fall, and that was what Boris shared in the last video. Now we present the bear case. Industry vet Tyler Buerlian, tough name, views fall cannabis reform, Tyler, as political posturing and purported benefits are overstated. A good counterbalance perspective. And so if you did want to watch the bear case, you can tune into this. I haven't tuned in yet. I do plan to watch it just to offset it, but it was interesting to scroll down and find out that it seems like this guy works in financing, and so obviously the longer it takes safe to pass, the more you can finance some of these cannabis companies at ridiculously predatory rates that make you, the bear in this case, more money. And so that's why you can understand why this guy has such a bear case potentially. But so just to highlight what TCO Vargas says, amazing interview and good to have different perspective, but it's obvious to me that he doesn't want safe to pass because his company benefits from no safe, since they offer financing to cannabis businesses. Maybe a conflict of interest, right? And so yes, they want to lock up as many cannabis businesses that they can pre-safe banking. The longer it takes means more businesses under their roof that probably won't change banking institutions once they're ingrained. Fee structures, pre-safe, post-safe. And so you can just see, big shocker, as he's with with Safe Harbor, a lender giving out debt in double digits. No shit, he doesn't want Safe to pass and has a bear case for it. So again, just take this with a grain of salt, much like we take what Boris says with a grain of salt. All we can do is plan accordingly for our own situations. But if you think this is a win out of scenario because people are dying, because dispensaries are being robbed, as we will get to that, better to plan accordingly than to miss out when that flip does switch. And so last few things to highlight. This one comes from Cannabis Health News. Another thank you to some of these random Twitter accounts that do share this positive information and spread the awareness, as medical cannabis use is not associated with an increased risk of hospitalization for mental disorders, according to a study. Authors concluded that patients are at low risk of psychiatric hospitalizations as a result of their consumption. So very interesting to find this, especially when a lot of other studies try to say the opposite thing and frame it saying that cannabis is harmful and a leading driver of this. And so you can grab the link in the description if you wanted to read more about the study, but happy to share more positive results when we look at cannabis in the positive light of what it is, a medicine, as opposed to the devil's lettuce. While we've got this one from the Sports Rush, just wanted to share it because it again highlights the just ridiculousness of the existing cannabis laws and why the contradiction, the gap, the discrepancy, the hypocrisy, all of it just should be addressed so that we can take America and the ideas we stand for a little more seriously again, because it's hard to take it seriously with such nonsense running rampant. While Montrell Harris faces felony charges for cannabis, Draymond Green is passing it out at his wedding. NBA Reddit calls out hypocrisy regarding cannabis legalization in the U.S. And so all this tells me, NBA Reddit, so left-wing NBA fans are calling out the hypocrisy, and I hope they can get louder and louder as they're pleading for Brittany Griner to be released as well, and that other, teacher that is detained in Russia for bringing medical cannabis. But ultimately, the best thing we can hope for is for more Americans to wake up, make noise, and expose this ridiculousness, and force the Dems' hands to keep their campaign promises and pass some sort of SAFE Plus that includes clemency and releasing nonviolent drug offenders, plus the Climb Act that would allow MSOs to finally uplist. Because why are we demanding SAFE? Because when you don't solve the problem continues. There's another Los Angeles man killed in cannabis dispensary shooting. Now, we know Schumer could have passed SAFE a year and a half ago. He had the votes, but he decides to wait because big pharmaceutical companies pay him a measly $223,000 to put their interests ahead of those of the American people. And while this is frustrating, the blood is simply on the hands of Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker, and Ron Wyden as they continue to delay SAFE. But their clock is running out. Do they even want to win in November? At this point, it doesn't look like it. But nonetheless, I just want to keep making noise because the sooner we can get SAFE banking passed, obviously we can save lives, we can make America safer, but also we make money for investing in companies that are going to change the status quo for the better. And that way we all win. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of this video. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video or you learned something from it, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Sunday for This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great week, everybody.